We specialize in local news, first, fast, and accurate. And with the worldwide resources of ABC and the Associated Press, you can't beat News Radio 84 WHAS, Kentuckiana's news, weather, and traffic station.
WHAS Storm Team Forecast.
This is Storm Team meteorologist Ken Schultz, and for this morning, mostly cloudy with flurries and possibly some snow showers here by dawn Tuesday morning. Our low 28 degrees. Now, accumulations of snow, if any, will be light and on the order of a quarter to a half inch in those areas that receive a snow shower Tuesday morning. For the day Tuesday, those snow showers will taper off the flurries with our high 40. Tuesday night, mostly cloudy, flurries ending in the low 27. Wednesday will be mostly cloudy and 43. Thursday, chance of rain mixed with snow on the high 42. I'm meteorologist Ken Schultz.
Mostly cloudy and 31 degrees. It's your official weather station, 84 WHAS. Good morning and welcome to the Joe Arnold Show, 84 WHAS. Happy to be with you once again, Tuesday, March 3rd, 1998. We begin yet another day with you, as we do every overnight, weekday mornings from midnight to 5. Here on 84 WHAS, we'll be taking your phone calls later in the program. Coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to be joined by telephone by the former defense secretary during the Reagan administration, Caspar Weinberger, currently with Forbes magazine and also an author himself. A recent book called The Next War actually came out last year. Had an opportunity to talk to his co-author last year, Peter Schweizer, and of course the other co-author, Caspar Weinberger, will be our guest momentarily, talking about the different military scenarios facing the United States. But of course the number one military issue facing us today is the continuing showdown with Iraq. In some quarters that has been relabeled now an uneasy peace. We have heard from ABC News overnight, this is the top of the hour here, that the Security Council at the UN has unanimously endorsed the UN chief Kofi Annan's deal to open Iraq's palaces to UN arms inspectors, and it warned of, quote, severest consequences, unquote, if Baghdad breaks that accord. Now, severest consequences is a victory. That language is a victory for the United States. That's what the language that America was seeking, as opposed to very severe consequences. Now, you know, this is all in the world of diplomatic bingo here, of what one small syllable change or something might make a huge difference in diplomacy. At the same time, and some comments made just within the hour, Ambassador Bill Richardson, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, says that the United States does not have to go back to the UN if the U.S. deems a military strike to be necessary. If the United States deems Iraq's actions to be in violation of the UN accord, even though it's a UN accord, the United States can act unilaterally. That's something we'll talk about with Caspar Weinberger in a moment. The automatic trigger question, whether or not the U.S. has that or not, basically the United Nations Security Council ignored that issue in deliberations throughout the evening. Of course, the big question here, and part of the problem, is that Iraq has been able to, or at least is trying to, redefine the actual agreement which Kofi Annan reached with Saddam Hussein within the last week and a half. Iraq saying now that inspectors would have a reasonable amount of time to check out the palaces and different areas, which that UNSCOM, which is the weapons inspections team that was first installed after the Gulf War, they would have a reasonable amount of time to check out those different locations. And the big question here is who is in charge of these inspections? Who is calling the shots? And the United States says Iraq, they can say anything they want, but it doesn't matter if Iraq said it's reasonable or unreasonable. It is up to the UN, and in fact, they say up to any member of of the UN Security Council who feels their interests are threatened. So in that regard, at that point, the U.S. is basically backing up that if China wanted to act unilaterally, or Russia, or Great Britain, or France, or the United States, any of those countries would be able to react. Once again, Bill Richardson speaking within the hours, saying that any block of weapons inspections would trigger action. He said that as far as any kind of optimism toward the agreement and whether or not it's going to hold, he says he is optimistic. But face it, Iraq's record is not good. But this 15-0 vote, a unanimous vote by the Security Council last evening, within the last couple of hours, might sway them in the same sense as you may have heard the report yesterday morning, or actually I guess from a day and a half ago now, from Sunday, of a Defense Department internal memo that was released saying that the United States should be more ambiguous in our language in regards to how trigger-happy we might be with our own nuclear arsenal. That perhaps Iraq would and other countries would not be as macho in their character, they wouldn't be as reckless perhaps in their behavior, if in fact they believe we had a trigger finger, if they thought it was a hair trigger on our military action. Of course, other concerns what we're talking about in the next couple of minutes have to do with just how long the U.S. troops are going to remain in the Persian Gulf, because that is an obvious concern. We're talking about an all volunteer army. We're talking about people that the Air Force pilots are quitting in record numbers. Morale continues to slide in the military. Overall, we have seen the military budget, the defense budget, slashed year after year during the Clinton presidency. And for that reason, there's two major consequences we'll have to ask Caspar Weinberger about. One would be the sliding morale and our military preparedness in general. But secondly is the military preparedness specifically in other parts of the world. Because since we are focusing so much of our energies upon the Persian Gulf right now, how prepared are we if something should happen elsewhere? That's what part of the focus of this book, which is not on paperback, called The Next War, with Caspar Weinberger and Peter Schweizer. Briefly, just to recap and let you know what the Iraq's response was to some of Bill Richardson's comments. The Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations, Nizar Hamdoun, appearing on ABC last night, saying Iraq does not intend to break the agreement reached. They say the agreement was reached without pressure. I guess the sticking point as far as this issue is concerned, that we can get into a little bit later with your phone calls, is who in fact is calling the shots of this investigation. Who is in charge of the investigation? And the United States says it is UNSCOM. It is Richard Butler, the Australian, who was placed in that role by the UN, by Kofi Annan, while the Iraq is making a differential here by saying that Kofi Annan is in charge, and he appoints the head of the UNSCOM team, and he would call the ultimate shots in any of these investigations. So it almost seems that there's some sort of an internal deal here being reached between the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and Saddam Hussein that Iraq, I guess, is saying would somehow supersede any kind of a agreement that was reached or accord reached prior to the agreement reached between Kofi Annan and Saddam Hussein in February. And of course, as far as the issue of reasonable amount of time, they say, Nazir Hamdoun says, it's a common sense issue. He says it's not Iraq to say what's reasonable or unreasonable. He said it'll be common sense what's reasonable or unreasonable. That remains to be seen. But he did, at least when pressed, give at least some time frame. He said we're not talking about years here. So I guess he's talking about he wants it to happen sometime within 1998 for all of this to be settled and for Iraq to be able to go off on their own. A final point before our first break of the hour and then to our phone conversation with Caspar Weinberger, and that is something which I'm not saying that I'm the first person to bring it up. I'm not. But I brought this up months ago saying why don't we at least approach this from a creative way and use the power of radio? How about Radio Free Iraq? And now it looks like Congress is coming on board that option and saying, let's do whatever we can. If we want to overthrow Saddam Hussein, as opposed to launching some sort of a Bay of Pigs operation or sending CIA operatives in to assassinate him, why not do our best to foment some sort of, not anarchy, but disenchantment with Saddam Hussein within his country himself. Allow the word to get in there, whether it be from the Iraqi nationals who say that they are the rightful owners of any kind of authority, and they were appearing before Congress today, or whether it be anyone else within Iraq who might be able to respond to that kind of a call. All conversations that we'll have with Caspar Weinberger as we continue. When we come back, we'll talk to him. Later in the hour, we'll take your phone calls. You're listening to a special edition of the Joe Arnold Show. An uneasy peace with Iraq, the U.S. military preparedness. 84 WHAS.
84 WHAS and the National Association of Women Business Owners are honoring some business superstars, and you're invited to join us. I'm Milton Metz, and I'm hosting a special lunch celebration to recognize the area's top women business owners of the year. It's at the Sealback, featuring nationally renowned guest speaker Phyllis Hill Slater, president of NAWBO.
Don't miss this special event, Thursday, March 5th. For tickets, call 329-1269. Sponsored by NAWBO and 84 WHAS.
I'm here with a Houseman Jeep Answer Lady. Answer Lady, what's the good word for today from Houseman?
Yes!
You must be referring to Houseman's positive commitment to their customers. It's an 82-year tradition at Houseman.
Yes!
Well, unless, of course, you're talking about Houseman's Service Department, where their team of automotive professionals doesn't just maintain cars, they maintain great relationships with all their customers. When you purchase a Jeep from Houseman, you're really getting a partner in the life of your vehicle with the attention you can't find other places.
Yes!
Oh, I get it. You must be talking about the fact that Houseman Jeep is remaining open during their incredible expansion and renovation at their East Market location with a great selection of new and used vehicles.
Yes!
Well, you've certainly done your homework, Answer Lady. Learn all the right answers for yourself at Houseman Jeep, 909 East Market and in Middletown on English Station Road across from Biggs. Houseman Jeep, where it's the year of yes.
Yes!
I knew you were going to say that.
These days, they say if you can keep your business running for 2 years, you're a true entrepreneur. I wonder what that makes Seat Cover Charlie. They've been around since 1953. That's 45 years, providing dependable service, quality products for your car, and loads of customer satisfaction. Today, Seat Cover Charlie handles a lot more than just upholstery. They can install and repair air conditioning, alarms, remote starters, keyless entries, and headliners starting at only $99.95. And now, Seat Cover Charlie's is also amazing signs and designs, where you can get any sign or banner fast. They have vinyl lettering, magnetic signs for cars, truck decals, yard signs, and more. Amazing Signs and Designs can scan in any logo or design, and political and church signs are a specialty. Seat Cover Charlie, serving Louisville for 45 years with quality interiors, vinyl tops, and more. And now, Amazing Signs and Designs with eye-catching signs for any occasion. Visit them at 827 South 8th. Seat Cover Charlie. Remember, nobody does a seat like Charlie.
Tough times are ahead, and your family is going to have to pull together. Don't worry, I'm only talking about spring cleaning time. But this year, while you and your family take care of the inside of your home, let the Hutchinson family take care of the outside. Hutchinson Remodeling Company. For 21 years, they've provided Kentuckiana families with quality work and polite, respectful service. And spring is a great time to look around your home for those little jobs you too often forget. Is it time to paint? Consider the value and warmth of Bird Vinyl Siding from Hutchinson, manufactured in Bardstown with a lifetime warranty. It comes in a variety of colors. What about those windows? Hutchinson can install easy clean Symington vinyl replacement windows that conserve energy and save you money. And if your roof shingles need replacing, Hutchinson will give you 15% off new Owens Corning shingles. Call the Hutchinson family today. Their number is in the business white pages. Out-of-town customers call 1-888-361-9577. That's Hutchinson Remodeling Company.
84 WHAS.
This is the Joe Arnold Show, 84 WHAS. Good morning and welcome. Caspar Weinberger has served in cabinet positions for 3 presidents, including 7 years as Secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration, and of course a far lengthier resume. Mr. Weinberger, I hope you don't mind if I go right to our questions because of our limited time. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to have the chance to be with you.
Just in general, before I get into some of my more specific questions, I'm very curious to hear of what your take is on the developments of the last, actually a couple of months, as well as this last week, concerning the U.S. position in Iraq.
Well, I think that we have handled it very badly from the beginning. We let him break his word for 5 months and delay all the inspections and therefore get more time to manufacture all of these chemical and biological weapons and hide them. And now we've let the UN negotiate for us and come out with an agreement which is not going to do the job at all. In fact, just this morning, Iraq is saying that our interpretation is wrong, and because the diplomats can accompany the inspectors, they can also decline to let the inspectors into particular sites. That's Iraq's interpretation, and they'll probably use that to block more inspections. So I think we've come out of it very, very badly, and it's our own fault.
It seems that, in general, the U.S. influence, the influence of the U.S. military, the U.S. Presidency, perhaps, has really been diminished as a result, perhaps, of letting the UN do our negotiating for us. What can be done to sort of stem that tide?
Well, I think it's time for us to tell the UN that unilaterally any further delays are going to bring unilateral action by us of an effective nature. Now, this resolution that everybody is striving to get passed by the Security Council simply says that if Saddam Hussein breaks his word again, he'll be subjected to the most serious consequences. Well, we've been talking about serious consequences for 5 months now, and nothing at all has happened. So he will just laugh at that, and he has to know and eventually receive punishment when he violates his word, and he hasn't had any punishment yet, so he sees no reason why he should have to keep his word.
Right now, the U.S. military, as you are well aware, is sort of I guess I'm going to call it like a holding pattern, really, in the Persian Gulf, kind of waiting for something to happen or not to happen. What sort of message does that send, first of all, to our military, and secondly, to the rest of the world? Are we really, the longer that we wait over there, is our preparedness diminished?
Well, our preparedness in other parts of the world is diminished by having that force there. Our commander in Korea has sent very strong messages over to the Pentagon saying that he needs reinforcement, and that for the first time in a long time there's no carrier within reach of Korea, should North Korea decide they might want to invade. And so we have stripped ourselves of capabilities in other parts of the world, and that's simply because our military has been reduced so drastically under Mr. Clinton in the last 4 years.
In your book with Peter Schweizer, The Next War, you outline some, that Korea, one of the conflicts that might happen, but other conflicts as well that are in the foreseeable future for the United States. I'm curious, since you were, of course, the Secretary of Defense under the Ronald Reagan administration and partially responsible for the breakup of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, what happened then, of course, was this peace dividend. People talked about perhaps less of a need for the U.S. military. It almost seems today this is proving there almost is more of a need for the U.S. military.
There is far more of a need than Mr. Clinton and his administration have been willing to admit. They made very, very deep cuts. We've had almost a procurement holiday for 3 years, haven't acquired new tanks or planes or ships. We have cut back drastically on the research and development funding, which is the thing that produced the new weapons that enabled us to win the Cold War at such minimal cost, and the Gulf War at such minimal cost. And we have completely gutted the strategic defense program so that we not only have no defense against the strategic and intermediate range missiles of Russia and China and other countries, but we have stopped work on it, and that will delay any time when we can get it. So in every sense, our military is less equipped than it was in 1991. We couldn't do another Gulf War right now because we don't have the air and sea lift to get the troops there. And if we put that many troops in as we did before, we'd have nothing left in other parts of the world. So we're in the cuts have been much too drastic. We don't need as big a force as we did in the middle of the Cold War, but we need a lot more than we have now.
You mentioned earlier in your first statement, if you will, that the ability of the U.S. or the need for the ability for the U.S. to act unilaterally. However, it seems that the American people, at least, have less of a stomach for that. It seems, at least according to polls, than in the past. Do you think that the U.S. Needs to remain to be some sort of a policeman for the rest of the world?
Well, I don't think we should be a policeman for the rest of the world, but I think we we have to recognize that if we don't utilize our enormous capabilities, our superpower status, to help keep the peace, nobody else is going to do it. You're never going to get the United Nations to do it. They aren't capable of fighting any kind of military action, as they've demonstrated in Yugoslavia and a few other places. And we would have to resign ourselves to the fact that Saddam Hussein and others like him would feel that they could go on and conduct their aggression without any punishment or any possibility of anybody trying to stop them. So we have to be a major part of keeping the peace in the world. And in order to do that, we have to be strong and capable, and we have to keep our alliances together. We've a lot of the loss of our allies in this immediate problem is because they don't perceive us as being a very reliable ally. The Saudis don't want to tie up with us or let us use their bases if they feel we're going to do 2 or 3 days token bombing and then leave. In this case, we didn't even did the 2 or 3 days token bombing. We allowed the UN to get talked out of any really drastic action by Saddam Hussein. And so, again, they are worried about tying up with an unreliable ally, which is what they view us now.
You would have rather have seen bombing to commence?
Well, I think it had to, yes, because there's nothing else going to convince him. He's not a rational person. He's not a person who is with whom you can negotiate. He doesn't keep his word. He's broken it 4 or 5 times. All we got in this latest agreement with the United Nations was that he would do what he said he would do in 1991 and failed to do 4 times. He's used gas on his own people up in the northern part of his country, and he's a thoroughly evil person, and it's time we recognize that. And if we can't get other people to help us in the punishment of him, why we'd have to do it alone. I think we'd have a lot more support both at home and abroad if we'd administer some really effective deterrent to him in the future.
Talking to Caspar Weinberger, of course, the Secretary of Defense during the Reagan administration as part of an illustrious career. You mentioned the chemical attack on his own people, on the Kurds in northern Iraq in 1988 during the war with Iran. Since that happened...
Then it was since then. He did it about 3 years ago, too.
Was since the first attack, and perhaps the most demonstrative, did happen, in fact, in 88. I'm just curious, since that happened on your watch, if you will, what was the U.S. response then? Why weren't we as upset about it then as we are now?
Well, I actually, my own watch, I was finished in 87, but
Okay.
I don't know what the basic reason was. It was, but his principal offense with the use of gas was against his own people. This was an attempt to use it against the Iranians in 1988, but he used it against his own people about 2 to 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that just demonstrates what kind of a person he is. Any kind of opposition to him at home is stamped out with killings, and he assassinated both of his sons-in-law. This is not a man you can do business with, and that's why I think the UN Secretary General made a lot of very absurd statements about what a strong leader he is and how decisive. He's very decisive when he decides to kill you, but that's not quite why we anything that should merit praise from the UN.
You might already think that you've answered this question for me, but I'm just curious, and not to be too simplistic.
No, sure.
But what actual threat does Saddam Hussein pose?
Well, at the moment he poses, we don't know precisely how much of an accumulation he's made of these weapons, but we know that he has some and has been manufacturing them. He poses the threat of being able to blackmail his neighbors with the fact that he might use them, and he also poses the threat that in the future he will always be threatening potential invasions as he did against the Kuwait, and that in order to contain him we'll have to keep substantial forces there, but forces we will be ready to use, and we haven't used the forces that we have taken from other parts of the world where they're vitally needed too. He poses the same threat that a murderer, a mass murderer, is alive and allowed to wander free with a substantial amount of military force behind him in a very dangerous area of the world. And I don't believe there's ever going to be any solution that will end the problem or bring us any peace there to Israel, to Jordan, to any of these countries until he's gone. And that's why we should state that as our clear objective, which we haven't done yet. In fact, we've stated quite the contrary. And then we should carry it out by every means possible, such as groups, recognizing another group as the legitimate government of Iraq, trying to get him tried and indicted by war crimes trials, and financially support the resistance groups by releasing some of the frozen Iraqi assets to those groups.
In a way, don't our actions from the Persian Gulf War, in the sense that we were protecting the sovereignty of one nation, Kuwait, don't they sort of fly in the face of replacing him or appointing another?
That is what happened, and unfortunately, I'm sorry it happened. We were 3 days outside of Baghdad. We had nothing between us and his capital. We could easily have taken him and put him in a jail cell next to Noriega, had a nice long war crimes trial, and meanwhile, the Arab countries' neighbors could have put in a army of occupation and eventually get a government that the people and the neighbors could live with. That is not the case now. I'm sorry we didn't do it in 1991, but we'll now have a harder job, but it still has to be done if we ever want any peace or stability in that region. You'll never get it as long as he's there.
Caspar Weinberger, our guest, will take more of our conversation as we continue on 84 WHAS.
84 WHAS Louisville.
Be without limits.
This as the Security Council passed unanimously a resolution warning Baghdad of the severest consequences if it again impedes UN weapons inspectors. An extraordinary open hearing by a Senate panel on whether to
indict Saddam Hussein as a war criminal, to support and recognize an Iraqi government in exile, and to do it all openly without the CIA.
Says ABC's John McWethy at the Pentagon. Appearing Tuesday before a grand jury in D.C., Vernon Jordan, the president's longtime friend, to answer questions about why he tried to help Monica Lewinsky get a job. A fourth straight record close for the Dow, up 5 points. The Boy Scouts ban on gays breaks discrimination laws, says a New Jersey appeals court. The Scouts plan to appeal. For the ABC Information Network, I'm Chuck Sievertson.
Traffic reports from early morning through the midday to evening. Bank One Skywatch 84 is always there to get you out of jams on 84 WHAS, Kentuckiana's news, weather, and traffic station.
WHAS Storm Team Forecast.
This is Storm Team meteorologist Ken Schultz, and for this morning, mostly cloudy with flurries and possibly some snow showers here by dawn Tuesday morning. Our low 28 degrees. Now, accumulations of snow, if any, will be light and on the order of a quarter to a half inch in those areas that receive a snow shower Tuesday morning. For the day Tuesday, those snow showers will taper off the flurries with our high 40. Tuesday night, mostly cloudy, flurries ending in the low 27. Wednesday will be mostly cloudy and 43. Thursday, chance of rain mixed with snow on the high 42. I'm meteorologist Ken Schultz.
Mostly cloudy and 31 at your official weather station, 84 WHAS. 12:32 and a half, as always, bottom of the hour. A quick look of our sports scores from last night. First of all, Lady Cards gave it their best shot today or tonight in Louisville. They fall to Memphis 79-75. LaTanya Johnson scoring 33 points. Tamika Whitmore adding 24 to lead top-seeded Memphis to that victory over Louisville in the Conference USA Championship game tonight. That earns the Lady Tigers of Memphis the league's automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. Johnson and Whitmore each scored 4 points during an 8-2 run that gave Memphis a 77-70 lead with 2.5 minutes left in the game. We'll have more on that later on in the program. Other scores from last night, the NBA final, Washington over Lakers 96-86. It was Charlotte 112, Golden State 83. Detroit over Dallas 100-94. In the third period, San Antonio leads Sacramento 65-59. In the NHL last night, Pittsburgh over Toronto 3-1. Buffalo shuts out the Rangers 1-0. New Jersey gets by Philadelphia 4-3. Detroit by 2 over Phoenix 3-1. In overtime, Edmonton squeaks by Colorado 5-4. In the second period, Carolina is shutting out San Jose 2-0. Los Angeles and Vancouver are knotted at 2 in the second period. We'll have more of our conversation with Caspar Weinberger in just a few moments as we continue on 84 WHAS. Let me tell you about springtime in Kentucky. You know all about that, obviously. But, of course, it means one thing to most of us, the Kentucky Derby. And while the Derby is held at Churchill Downs, the greatest 2 minutes in sports is celebrated with Derby parties around the country and around the globe. And no matter where you're listening this morning, I have one suggestion for you. and that is A Taste of Kentucky can make your Derby party the Derby party. In fact, if you're listening this morning and anywhere in North America, and perhaps you've moved away from Louisville or from Kentucky yourself, and you want a little of a taste of Kentucky to import and to bring to your home and show everyone where you are now just how wonderful Kentucky is, this is the place to call, the place to stop by if you're ever in town. Two great locations, both in Middletown and at the Mall St. Matthews here in Louisville. But you also can call toll-free, 800-444-0552. And you can celebrate the Derby with a club or a neighborhood party, a business party, charity benefits. This year, why not have your own Derby party, make it authentic with supplies from A Taste of Kentucky. They have everything you need. They have invitations, they have betting tickets, mint julep mix, all the Derby paraphernalia from Churchill Downs and from the Kentucky Derby Festival, and real Kentucky menu suggestions with Derby pie for dessert, obviously. Whether this is your first Derby party or you're a seasoned professional, call A Taste of Kentucky, ask for their free catalog and free 7-page booklet, Hints for a Successful Derby Party. The number again, 800-444-0552. On the internet, it's www.atasteofkentucky, all one word, .com. That number again, 800-444-0552. Back in a moment with Caspar Weinberger on 84 WHAS.
You make the call to the 84 WHAS talking phone line and get all the information you need about sports, health and legal information, entertainment, movies, and more. All it takes is a touch-tone phone and the code numbers you'll find at the front of your new Bell South Yellow Pages. Call anytime, day or night. Dial 588-1000, code 8484 for the 84 WHAS Fun for the Arts Entertainment line. The 84 WHAS talking phone line. What you need to know when you need to know it.
84 WHAS.
Welcome back to the Joe Arnold Show, 84 WHAS. Former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger joining us. I'm curious. I imagine you've seen this study that was released, "The Essentials of Post-Cold War Deterrence," written by the Defense Department's Strategic Command. At least it was leaked and obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. But they're urging some more ambiguity, basically, in U.S. nuclear policy. So I guess in a sense they almost want people to think we're more hot-headed, so they'll think twice before they act irresponsibly elsewhere in the world. What do you think about that?
Well, I haven't seen that report. I don't know precisely what they recommend. I think that it ought to be apparent, and it should be clear to the world that A, we do have a nuclear capability, and that B, we would never use it except to deter any kind of attack upon us or on our allies, but that it is there and it is capable of being used. And if we denuclearize, if we take all of these weapons off alert, as Mr. Clinton has been talking about and suggesting, then we simply advise the rest of the world that our ability to deter any action by any people like Saddam Hussein or any other aggressors is not only going to be limited but largely ineffective. And that would be a terrible mistake. That's just an invitation to them, those nations that wish to do so, to get into some very repressive actions of the kind Saddam Hussein has taken without any punishment.
What kind of job do you think the current Secretary of Defense is doing, William Cohen?
Well, I think he's doing as good a job as he can under the commander-in-chief he has. You can only be as good a cabinet secretary as you have a good president. And I think, actually, he has a president who not only doesn't understand the military, basically doesn't like it, but is primarily interested at the moment in his own survival, and secondly, in trying to make sure that his domestic pool ratings stay high and not doing anything that might interfere with that. And that's a pretty poor basis for constructing a foreign policy. I think Mr. Cohen knows better. I think he has been on the committees. He understands what has to be done, but I don't think he's getting any kind of necessary support from the administration.
You mentioned the president's own survival. Do you think some of his problems personally are affecting his foreign policy decisions?
Yes, I do. And I think worse than that, I think the perception of them is very bad. The perception of them in many of these countries, and I've talked to a lot of people in the Mideast and elsewhere, is that his presidency has been greatly weakened, that he's concentrating primarily on surviving and on launching a lot of counterattacks against Mr. Starr and stuff like that have nothing to do with whether or not he himself is guilty. And at the same time, this prevents him from taking any very firm or decisive action because he's afraid of losing some local domestic popularity. I think it's a very bad situation in every way. Whether that perception that they have is correct or not is not nearly important as the fact that they have that perception. And that weakens the presidency, and as long as he maintains this path that he's on now of simply attacking people who are required by law to investigate him, instead of telling the public what actually are the facts and hiding everything, concealing it, covering up, stonewalling, all those old tactics, that just weakens it further.
You mentioned, of course, the looking at the polls and making sure that there's a U.S. The electorate, if you will, supports any kind of military action that we might take. How important are polls? How important is the opinion of America when you're making a military decision?
Well, it has to be important. It's vital that it be there, but it's also vital that the public be informed of what's happening and why the military action may be necessary. And I think if that were done and there was some leadership exercise, you'd find plenty of support for it. People keep saying, oh, look what happened in Ohio State. Well, anybody knows that if you go to a major, large university campus, you're going to find about 5, 6, 7% of the audience is going to be very vocally opposed to any kind of military action. That's understood, and it has been for years, probably always will be. But that isn't the way you guide foreign policy, and that isn't the way you advise the public as to why for the use of military strength may very well be necessary, and that's the essence of leadership, that you lead the public and inform them. And then I don't think there'd be any question about public support. There never was in the Gulf War.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Korea conflict, or not the Korean conflict, not the one from the 50s, but as far as any kind of one that could be brewing currently, what do you think is that the area of the world that you think has the most likelihood of erupting next to Iraq?
Yes, it is. I think that you've got a very serious situation in North Korea. You've got a not only bankrupt but worse than bankrupt economy. You've got a large military that's maintained by a half-mad ruler who doesn't allow any dissent, and very well realizes that in order to try to gain some kind of economic recovery rather than change his policies, he may well feel that he has to invade South Korea, particularly as he believes they may be weakened now by their economic problems. In the scenario we did in the book, which of course is fiction, but is based on the scenarios used by the staff and war colleges, why North Korea persuades China that it might be a good time for them to try to take Taiwan, and that would test our ability to deal with two major crises simultaneously, and our forces aren't strong enough to do that. We would take terrible losses if that should be the case, and that's why it's so essential to build up our defenses, and so essential that we start work immediately on acquiring some kind of defense against nuclear, biological, and chemical missiles of intercontinental and strategic range.
That's the whole question when you talk about, especially the chemical and biological weapons. This is something which, I mean, maybe some of these weapons, the chemical weapons at least, have been around since at least World War I. But isn't this a brave new world? Isn't this a whole other area that we're not used to dealing with?
Well, it is. It's a potential that's been there for quite a while. We destroyed most of our chemical war capability some years ago, and we have to make sure, therefore, that other countries which said they were going to destroy theirs have done so. Otherwise, we would put our troops at a terrible disadvantage. We have protective clothing. We have inoculations against anthrax. But you fight at a terrible disadvantage if you fight in that kind of an environment. And we have to realize that there are countries, and Saddam Hussein's is certainly one of them, where they don't hesitate to use weapons of this kind. They've already, as I said, used poison gas against their own people, and he's perfectly capable of trying to use it against anybody that he decides he wants to attack, or even worse, to threaten them and blackmail them with it.
Caspar Weinberger, our guest, for a few more minutes here. You mentioned, we talked just briefly before about maybe the president's reputation being harmed both internationally and domestically with this crisis. There have been some comparisons, and some are inevitable when you talk about the independent counsel law. And of course, with the Iran-Contra situation during the Reagan administration, Lawrence Walsh has spent a long time looking into that situation. I'm just curious, what comparisons do you draw between Kenneth Starr and Lawrence Walsh?
Well, for one thing, they're totally different kinds of men. Lawrence Walsh was not in any sense an intelligent person. He measured his whole success by whether he got convictions that would hurt President Bush and former President Reagan. That was his whole object in life. Mr. Starr is, I think, a very competent, skilled investigator. I do think that the investigative independent counsel office law gives anyone who is appointed to that position far too much authority and far too much ability to proceed in a way that might not be in any sense responsible. I think that Mr. Starr is not doing that course of action at all. But I think what we're seeing is the White House, as they always do under Mr. Clinton, trying their best to change the attack so that instead of whether or not Mr. Clinton did any of these things he's charged with doing and whether or not he's making credible denials or just more lies, now the whole focus seems to be on what a terrible man Mr. Starr is, and that's not the issue at all. The issue is were Mr. Clinton's actions, and he won't tell anybody about that. He refuses to talk about that, and that, I think, is why it's essential. But I think there's a great deal of question about having an officer as independent as an independent counsel is under any administration, and no matter who he is. But I think that the country's fortunate to have somebody like Mr. Starr instead of Mr. Walsh at this time in that office.
But assuming for a moment, just hypotheticals that we've been dealing with for so long, obviously hypotheticals. Let's say there was a president that was being unjustly criticized, unjustly investigated, perhaps by a ruthless independent counsel. Not this guy, but just someone in the future sometime. Don't you think that sets up the possibility of really harming a president's credibility, as we mentioned before?
Or anyone's credibility. I don't think we should have in democracies people that have the ultimate power that independent counsels have. I think they need to have a lot more oversight, and I think it's important that we realize that in Mr. Walsh's case, he drew just millions out of the Treasury with no accounting for it, didn't need any appropriations, funds were appropriated in advance, used them for any purposes that he wished, and had no term, no tenure, was able to continue on as long as he wanted to stay there, and those are too many unbridled powers in a democracy, and they could be used adversely. I don't think Mr. Starr is using them that way now, but I think there are great risks in that kind of office, and I don't think it's basically ultimately compatible with a democracy.
Before I let you go, what prediction do you think, as far as Iraq is concerned, what do you foresee in the coming months?
I'm terribly afraid that after a few weeks, when somebody wants to go in and inspect one of the sites that he thinks is using for his weapons purposes, he'll say the agreement doesn't require that he allow us to do so, and that he will block it. And then there'll be a long debate and discussion. Meanwhile, he'll continue to manufacture them, and we'll have the same kind of hesitancy to give him any kind of effective punishment that we had this time. I think it's a very bad agreement. I think it was even worse for Mr. Clinton to turn over all the negotiating authority here to the United Nations, and I think that the United Nations came up with a terrible agreement, a very fuzzy, a very unclear agreement that is subject to a lot of interpretations and will enable Saddam Hussein not only to claim that he won, but to delay things more than the 5 months he's already delayed them. So I think it's a very sad day, and I think that we need to recognize that and try to correct it as soon as possible.
One final question, more of a personal question for you, and that is, I'm just curious, since you served for so long under Ronald Reagan, do you ever have an opportunity to see him anymore?
Well, I haven't seen him for some time. I've talked with his son and members of his family. Physically, he's very well. He goes out and plays golf and is in the office most days, and his memory is pretty well gone, but physically
What is next for you?
Well, I'm still chairman of Forbes magazine, and primarily, I guess, as I used to say even years ago, the next thing is survival. So that we're just keeping going and looking at the world scene and writing about it and writing various books and things of that kind, and hoping for better leadership in the United States before too much longer.
Well, your latest book, of course, The Next War with Peter Schweizer, is not out in paperback, or is now out in paperback, I should say. So congratulations on that. I have indeed read it, and I had an opportunity to talk to Peter Schweizer earlier. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Nice to talk to you. I appreciate your having me.
Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
That's Caspar Weinberger, of course, the former defense secretary under Ronald Reagan, and we'll come back with your phone calls, your response to our conversation this morning, and an opportunity to talk about U.S. policy and many of the topics that we were able to talk to the defense secretary about over the last half an hour or so. This is the Joe Arnold Show, 84 WHAS.
Look who's popping up at WHAS.com. It's Fred Wishy with the latest growing tips for the season. Learn to plant like a pro and catch up on the nature of things. Plus, check the latest headlines, weather, sports scores, and more. While there, visit Autos Etc. and tour the Car Mall, the first place to shop for a new or used car, with dealers like Bob Montgomery Honda, Bales Chrysler Eagle Hyundai Jeep Nissan Plymouth, and Broadway Chevrolet. Internet services for WHAS.com provided by NTR.net. From 84 WHAS.
And here is the WHAS Storm Team forecast from meteorologist Ken Schultz. This morning, mostly cloudy with flurries, possibly some snow showers by dawn, low of 28. The accumulation, if any, will be light and on the order of a quarter to a half an inch in those areas that receive a snow shower later this morning. Also today, mostly cloudy with flurries, a few snow showers later into the afternoon, high 40. This evening, mostly cloudy with flurries ending low 27. The outlook for Wednesday, mostly cloudy and cool, high 43. And Thursday, chance of rain mixed with snow and a high of 42. Mostly cloudy, 31. At your official weather station, 84 WHAS. This is the Joe Arnold Show, 84 WHAS. Welcome back. Your phone calls now, 571-8484. Here in Kentuckiana, it's a toll-free call anywhere in North America. That number, 800-444-8484. And a free call for Cellular One at 511. It's been a few weeks, actually, since we've spoken about the Iraqi situation in any depth whatsoever on this program. We just, of course, completed a conversation with former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger and his views on this brewing situation. It's not by any means over. And I think a part of the problem, and I know sometimes I think there's even less of an inclination to talk about this issue because we want it to be over. And we went through the threat of the war happening, of a military strike. It was talked about almost being inevitable. And then, of course, this last-ditch 11th-hour effort by Kofi Annan with the United Nations ended up being successful, at least in the short term. What I said earlier, when that first happened, and my concern remains, and I think Caspar Weinberger alluded to this fact as well, is that Iraq's record is one of noncompliance. It's one of saying yes to something and then basically retreating slowly but surely away from any kind of commitment to the international community. And what I likened it to previously when we talked about this was an effort to wear down America and American resolve, sort of like when you go in and out of the cold too many times. You ever notice how tired you are when you come in out of the cold and you warm up and you go back outside again? It's like all the energy is sapped from your body. That is, I think, the situation with the United States and Iraq. We currently have troops on standby, on hold. They are not standing down, but on basically, as I described it earlier, in somewhat of a holding pattern, waiting to find out what to do, waiting basically for Iraq to misstep so we can go in there and firebomb them and basically go after them. But in the meantime, what do we do? In the meantime, what does that mean for military preparedness, not only in the Persian Gulf, but also across the world? A story that came out last week: Air Force pilots and ground crews consider Persian Gulf duty a high-stress assignment, even when there is no imminent threat of combat, because it takes them far from their families and the comforts of their homes. The current Iraqi crisis raising stress levels to higher levels than normal, causing concern among Air Force leaders. They're juggling air and ground crews in the Persian Gulf to keep personnel mentally fresh in case war breaks out. Major General Donald Peterson, who is the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for Air and Space Operations, saying the Air Force is relying on reservists to help share the load and reduce the stress on full-time personnel. He said, there are strains on people. Not a day goes by that we don't discuss this issue. And it's not going to go away. It's not going to go away as long as Iraq continues to, play cat and mouse with the U.S. and with the UN. Air Force has had air and ground crews in the Persian Gulf region flying regular missions over southern Iraq since 1991 to enforce the no-fly zone that was established by the peace accords that ended Operation Desert Storm. Peterson saying that the Air Force is currently flying 100 missions a day, adding, we could not do what we are doing today without those Air National Guard and Reserve volunteers. Pentagon says the Iraq crisis is also testing the Air Force's ability to keep its aging air fleet in spare parts. We talked about that with Caspar Weinberger regarding the military preparedness and the amount of budgeting toward equipment. It just, after a while, these things wear down. To date, he says the service has been able to keep its aircraft operating at peak efficiency. However, he acknowledges that we are flying our aircraft pretty hard and says parts could be hard to come by for older planes in the future as the Air Force phases them out while modernizing its fleet. So your phone calls, your thoughts on that as well this morning. 571-8484. It's a toll-free call at 800-444-8484 and a free call for Cellular 1 at 511. Coming up top of the hour, we'll hear an update from ABC News concerning the latest of this uneasy peace with Iraq. A unanimous vote by the UN Security Council Monday evening. According to President Clinton, he says it sends the clearest possible message. Iraq must make good on its commitment to give the international weapons inspectors immediate, unconditional, and unrestricted access to any suspect site, any place, any time. And I think the question which I guess is begging an answer again from you this morning, when I was talking about, the American resolve, is that what is your resolve? How do you feel about this now that we're going through all this and we're seeing Iraq, as I said before, kind of playing cat and mouse with all of this? Do you think the United States has the, whether you call it the moral authority or the jurisdiction or the international authority to strike unilaterally against Iraq? If Iraq next week when the UNSCOM inspectors go back in there with the diplomats, when they resume these inspections, if they should happen to say, well, not right now, or let's say that the diplomats that will be attached to these new UNSCOM weapons inspections teams, if these diplomats somehow try to block access to a particular area, let's say a diplomat is from Jordan or from Syria or from Saudi Arabia, then would that be enough justification in your mind for us to go in and bomb Iraq because we are not getting unfettered access to those presidential palaces and other areas that we suspect chemical weapon activity is going on? What is our authority, and what do you think we should do if Iraq does not live up to this accord? Are we forced into a situation where we have to attack? And what do you think the consequences of those things will be? We talked to an international expert earlier, and now it's your turn. 571-8484 and 800-444-8484. Let's go ahead and get one phone call on at least before we end up the hour. Good morning, Joy.
Good morning, Joe. I just finished a couple of weeks ago listening to all the build-up on Vietnam, all of this business. Johnson didn't want to lose face, and he was the macho man. Then tonight I watched Bay of Pigs, not just the propaganda, but different points of view about how we got into that.
Do you think we're being backed into a situation here? Do you think it's more of a...
I think that right now Iraq is the one that we are bound and determined that we're going to bomb them again. We want war with them, just like we wanted to do something with Cuba. Then we wanted to do something with Nicaragua back during Reagan. And the Bay of Pigs was inherited by President Kennedy from Eisenhower, CIA. President Kennedy did not even know what Eisenhower had started, the CIA down there. And it's just a big mess, but people better pay attention. And I want to see, when we airstrike strike Iraq again, just what happens. Remember the last time the World Trade Center? So we'll just see what happens to our country. We better learn to stay out of there.
But you think it is inevitable?
I just think yeah, probably, because that's what they want to do. But our country.
But don't you think? But the onus. What about what Bill Richardson said? The UN ambassador from the U.S. said late last night when he said the onus is on Iraq. As long as they cooperate, they'll have no problem. We won't bomb them as long as they live up.
Bottom line, the Bay of Pigs. How close? Our country did not even know.
Well, we're not. But obviously, Joey, we're not talking about Cuba. We're not talking about 30 years ago. We're talking about today.
About the same situation.
Okay.
Nuclear war. This time it'll be germ warfare. We don't even know what's going on.
All right, Joy. Thanks for your phone call. We'll take a response to your phone call. Is this the same thing as the Bay of Pigs? Is this the same thing as Vietnam? Your phone calls next hour. The Joe Arnold Show, 84 WHAS.
This is Kentuckiana's news, weather, and traffic station.
84 WHAS, Louisville.
News on the hour.
From ABC News, I'm Chuck Sievertson. A warning from UN Chief Kofi Annan to Iraq.
No promise of peace and no policy of patience can be without limits.
The Security Council passed unanimously an ultimatum warning Iraq of the severest consequences if it again impedes UN weapons inspectors. U.S. Ambassador Bill Richardson says if Iraq reneges on the deal, it doesn't